like gasoline that was
Yeah.
freaking everyone
Oh,
out.
yeah, yeah.
Hey, good morning, Chris.
I
Can you
like
give
the
us a sound check?
Okay,
I'm
perfect,
big to
good. He
the.
feels very self-conscious about it most of the time, but
Is Burton's open tonight?
Tis. I have to go in.
Is it any good?
Hey, Chris.
I haven't
Morning.
gone yet.
Oh, there we go.
really good.
All right, well, we're at the top and we're live and everything's here. I think we're ready to
Great,
kick it
thanks.
up.
Thanks, Steven. It's 10:01 today, October 30th, 2024. This is a regular meeting of the Grand County Budget Advisory Board. Those members of the board present are Wojtek, Bowles, Hackwell, and Kaufman virtually. Walker, Winfield, and Throgmorton are absent today. We have a Grand County Commissioner, Michael McCurdy, here present for the proceedings. I will go right ahead to presentations and discussions. We've got action items scheduled for the end, and I'll hand it off here to Finance Director Stephen Bowles to lead us. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Well, we're nearing the end of our initial phase of the budget planning process, where this is the final week where we review, and Kevin Walker,
Thanks.
Budget Advisory Board member, just showed up. We're at the end of what we're calling the proposed budget section, where today this Budget Advisory Board needs to recommend the tentative budget to go into commission review and starting next week in November. So we're kind of wrapping up the budget planning process, and the agenda items today are with our personnel services. Tess will describe any new, that's the summary of new position requests and the summary of the COLA cost of living adjustment and the pay plan changes. Now, we do have a specific commission meeting agenda item on 11/6 where we'll go more in detail about the COLA and new positions for approval. Today, we want to just summarize them so we can review the overall context of the budget impact. Then we're also going to talk about our 2025 revenue forecast methodology. We've got some charts to show, but the idea today is to really look at current trends and decide what steps we want to take to by 11/6 as well to decide on what our revenue forecast trend will be for 2025. And then we'll do a budget fund balance, or not the budget, but the fund balance overview and a current state of our 2025 general fund budget balance, just to give us an idea of where we're at in the budget planning to date, what we need to do to kind of bring that into balance in the next stage in commission review. And we'll wrap it up with an analysis justifying any budget drop, and I'll turn this over to Gabe when we get to that, but it's just kind of a historical trend of what our budgeting methodology is in balancing the budget. Okay, well, with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Tess. Now, do you want me to open these documents that are posted here? Or
let's see, let's go ahead and,
I also have them up from what?
yeah, what I would say is, as long as everybody is okay with this, I can kind of give you a sneak preview of what the full presentation to the commission will look like on the 6th, and we can just go ahead and open up the PowerPoint.
Okay.
Which is yep, exactly, perfect.
Okay.
All right, so we'll first go over the proposed cost of living adjustment. And so what we can do is, and again, just for the sake of being concise, Stephen, if you wouldn't mind
Go to
going
that
down a
page.
few slides, and I'll let you know when to, okay, so this is perfect, if you don't mind. So I went ahead and just put into a table to show that we have been able to, as a county, provide a COLA adjustment to our employees for the last 10 years. What we have based this off of historically is Social Security Administration's recommended increase. Based on their calculations, they typically put this out early to October. And so on October 10th, they finalized it. at 2.5% for 2025, and so that is the percentage that we used to base our proposed grade and step chart adjustments off of. And Stephen, if you wouldn't mind just scrolling down a little bit,
Do you mind if
of course.
before you move on from the topic of the COLA?
Yes.
I want to just note that there is always the option, of course, it's an important tool for compensating and rewarding and retaining and recruiting staff to the county. There remains the option to not include the COLA, include a reduced COLA, or B, kind of defer the COLA, which has been done in the past, applied mid-year there. So if the commission feels uncomfortable with applying it first off, we can see if revenues come in strong through the spring, and then it can be applied retroactively or you know, what would be the opposite of retroactively as far as moving forward? Y'all know what I mean? So anyway, just a thing. It's not like a all or nothing. There's some like different paths for the commission to choose there,
Yes.
depending, yeah.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And then Stephen, if you wouldn't mind just going down, so what I went ahead and.
Tell me when to stop.
This is great,
Okay.
so, I went ahead and am going to show the 2024 chart, and obviously these numbers are very, very small, so.
Oh, I was like, I'm like, oh, I get that.
Yeah, no, I know. So essentially, the reason that I did this is to demonstrate that what we did is we did draft both a grade and step chart with and without a COLA for 2025. So essentially, the without COLA option is the exact same as the 2024 grade and step chart, which has previously been approved by the county. So Stephen, if you wouldn't mind scrolling down. So again, this is the draft of our graded step chart without entering in the cost of living adjustment. And these attachments are on this meeting so that you're actually able to view them more largely. And then Stephen, if you wouldn't mind going down a little bit more. And then this is our grade and step chart if we do include the cost of living. And Stephen, if you'd go down just a little bit more. I did go ahead and just because this is part of the greater presentation that will be given to the commission on the 6th, I did include the pay chart draft for elected officials that also factor in and do not factor in a COLA increase. And Stephen, if you wouldn't mind, keep going. So again, this is with the COLA increase. And then if we could go down a little bit more. So we went ahead and just did a breakdown of employees as well as elected officials. So if we opt to include a COLA, and this is with the assumption that it would be adopted as of January, which has the majority of time been the commission's decision, then the total cost difference for our employees would be about $378,895. For our elected officials would be $21,658.98 for a total impact of $400,554.08. Does anybody have any questions on that before we move on?
I'll just throw out the context that our current proposed budget was without any COLA adjustments. So I'll even share a status of what that is. But what we did is we just add that 405.54 to the total presently budgeted for a one line approval. And then if it's approved, then we'd go back and admit that to the budget. But I'll describe that status here in just a minute. But that 400,554 is an important number because we'll show how we're going to just tack that on to what's currently budgeted.
Thank you. And we can keep on going.
Looking for the position. Oh, there.
Yep, so these are all of our position requests. So I broke them down by new position proposals as well as reclassification proposals. In total, we had 16 requests submitted. We asked all of the department heads early in October to get their proposals into us. And so from there, we were able to assist them in drafting job descriptions, revised job descriptions, if that was appropriate, as well as estimated total cost. Of course, there are some factors that are to be determined, such as the step that a potential employee would come in at if it's a new position. So for the new positions, what we did is we asked the department heads to give us essentially what their most likely or ideal candidate would be at stepwise, and we used those steps in our calculations. And I would be happy if you would like me to go through each of these positions, but I want to make sure that I'm respectful of you all's time. And we can either dive into it a little bit more deeply right now, or we can save that for the commission. What would be most helpful to you all?
The only comment I would make, as we discussed this in a prior meeting, is whether or not the evidence tech has already been approved, so. I was in the standing in their last conversation that it hadn't been approved, so I don't think it should be.
And I think that there's still, that has continued to be a source of confusion. The sheriff's department did.
Yeah.
Submit that
That's why I
proposal
brought
again,
it
so.
last time, but in that conversation, it sounds like it's already been approved and funded from the commission meeting.
You approved in last year's budgeting?
No, I was informed that it was approved this year, it was requested.
I thought we
One of
wanted,
the meetings that we discussed, you guys said it had temporary position. I said, well, maybe it hasn't been funded. And you guys said if it's been approved, it's been funded. So,
But no one's been hired yet.
no, because the sheriff's under the impression that it hasn't been approved yet,
Yeah.
so.
The evidence tech, that's what we're talking about? I didn't hear, okay. I remember making a priority out of that, but I don't remember it being approved, but we could probably just dig back through
I
the
mean,
notes, right?
we
You just leave it on, yeah.
Date for the meeting,
Yeah.
so we can check with.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just make a note to follow up, and whether it's approved and it comes off the list, if it's not, it's on, yeah.
I thought the only conversation around that was, we did approve it, but it was not a permanent position.
It was part-time.
Yeah, it was part-time.
Still, that's what's requested on there.
Okay.
It says part-time.
Mhm.
I can't see.
I know.
Yeah.
It's very
Figure
small.
that.
It's very small. I assure you. it
I'm
will
very
not
blind,
be
so don't-
this
Yep.
when we do the full rigmarole, but
Otherwise, that's the only comment.
Without having sort of scrolled down and seen any of the individual details. What's most important here in this breakdown, and it could relate back to the figures that we already looked at as far as the impacts of the new positions and things of that nature. Is that we have to make sure to delineate what the general fund impact is of each position and all the positions in aggregate. And also make sure that we're spelling out very clearly how much of these proposed positions are offset by grant funding or other funding sources. Because really, that's kind of all that matters, really. It's like, of course, other than justification of the positions and whether they seem justified or not, but also just like, some of these, a lot of these positions don't actually have a net impact on the general fund or much
So
less.
maybe the spreadsheet should have two columns, general fund impact, other costs, things that.
Where money
from
comes
other
from.
sources. Because you're right, that it's super important to distinguish between those two things.
Well, and Tess and I did put a salary and benefit estimate to all of these, and I believe all the new positions have a general fund impact. Now, whether there's a reimbursement like your jail commander, that's gonna be grant funded. But I am gonna present here in a minute, just the overall summary of salary and benefit impact or general fund.
So you're talking about something that's technically general fund, but then a grant comes into the general fund to compensate for it? Is that what you were?
That. All of these, the new positions fall in the general fund. But in like your case, you'll have a grant that will reimburse.
Yeah, but I think it's important to distinguish that. And
Yeah.
what's gonna happen, just to spell it out.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, we're gonna have a list of positions and some of them seem really important to us and some of them less important. And so, but we also have to, some of those less important positions might be fully grant funded.
right.
And so then we should say yes to this one, even though it's totally optional because it's not actually costing us anything, even if the money gets channeled through the
Yep.
general fund. So we
Yep.
just have to make sure that's very clear
That- good.
on the commission because it's gonna be a big meeting and we're gonna be looking at a lot of things and people.
Yep. Okay, well, let's make sure, Tess, that we have that delineation for the November 6th meeting.
Yep.
Right now, it's kind of a broad stroke. 10 new positions, 6 requests.
Yep, I can do that.
Okay.
All
Okay.
right.
Any other question? I think that satisfies my need for an overview, but any other questions for Tess?
Well, just more along those same. I assume last year, I think, maybe the previous year, we had like a paragraph about each position, kind of,
Yes,
The
yep, and so I can essentially preview what each of the layouts look like for new position versus reclassification, and then you all can provide feedback on if the
Yeah.
layout is helpful to you.
And I think
So
we
our
have that.
new position proposals are all within this format, where we discuss grade, department, supervisor, total request cost, and then the cost calculated, in regards to where they would hopefully fall on the step chart. So essentially, again, the ideal candidate or the likely candidate, and then a justification from the proposing department head.
yeah, so I guess my feedback would be to display not the cost, but break down the cost into, you know, general fund versus.
Mhm.
everything else.
I can
Again,
do
that
that.
needs to be made very clear.
Thank you. And then, so all of the new position proposals are within this format. And then Stephen, if you wouldn't mind scrolling down, I'll show you what the reclassification looks like.
Go down to the reclass page.
Exactly. And then the reclassifications look like this. So, and again, if a comparison is not very beneficial, then I'm happy to remove that and kind of get rid of some of that visual noise. I wanted to show what the current class looks like versus what's proposed. And again, go over the impact, which I'll ensure is related specifically to the general fund, and then a justification as to why that position is being requested to be reclassified.
And I guess my feedback on this one is that, you know, if you could put the difference, which in this case looks to be like $10,000 to make, you know, so we don't have to do these subtraction in our heads.
Yes, yes,
On math.
Oh, it's right here.
Difference fiscal impact, yep.
yes, it is the
Oh,
difference.
I thought
level
it
is
was- okay,
still
okay,
impacted,
great, great.
But
Yeah, I was like.
I will make it much larger, I assure
Well, you already bold-faced it, so I just need,
you.
okay, so that's already there. I'm happy.
Okay, very good.
And then, this isn't, so am I remembering correctly that maybe last year, or the year before, we went through a ranking exercise at the commission? So basically, we had all these things ahead of time. We wrote, because, you know, it can get chaotic in the meeting, we're trying to prioritize it, and something that I think has worked well for us in the past is just each commissioner individually provides a score, and then someone puts them together and say, okay, here's our kind of, you know, combined ranking from commissioners, and how far down the list do we want to go before? Or do we, you know, and source, anyone can propose to rearrange the list if they think there's some consideration that. So I see your head nodding, Gabe. Is
I
that-
think, well, I was planning on making use of that sort of offline survey method to take the temperature on any number of things and sort of make changes to the tentative based on those. And so, yeah, I think that everyone would get a chance first to present their justification in person if they wish. And then we'll send out a survey right over, and the commission can have discussion in the meeting, but we'll send out a survey to sort of sum up or create a conclusion to what everyone thinks.
And again, this is repeating past conversations, but one of my pet peeves on these surveys is often you're asked to rank things, you know, 1 through 10. I think that's bad, and I think you should just assign a score, you know.
Yeah.
That's between 1 and 10, and if you want to give them all the same score, because you really don't have a preference, you can do that.
Yeah.
And if someone, you know, so I think
I
that,
also don't like those rankings. Do you want 1 to 5 or 1 to 10? Or do you have a
I don't have a
recommendation?
strong preference about that.
I strongly agree, mostly disagree. Charlotte.
Totally.
Great. Well, what additional questions can I answer, or what would you all like to? And again, this is the overview. There's of course going to be, we're going to really dive into the details at commission most likely, but what can I provide to you all either today or in preparation for the 6th?
I just took the 2 notes to look at the approval of the evidence tech and just rank our new positions and just put a summary of the cost
Yeah, I think, you know,
above, and the general ledger, I'm sorry, the general fund, and what may be reimbursable.
figure
I
out
was
how
gonna
much is
say-
coming from other sources like grants. Make that prominent. You know, I think Gabe's gonna set up a ranking exercise.
I think that's heavily important to all commissioners. how much it costs, where the money comes from, even in the end, where the money came from.
Yes, definitely.
I
And
know
and
general fund is a push through on some, but to answer to our constituents, we both like, hey, it comes from a grant at the end of the year. Well,
Right.
I think that would be really, I mean, the best way to do it.
No, that's great feedback. Thank you. And there are a few positions where I did go ahead and do that breakdown or show, actually, we're going to save money by doing this because we're, you know, not rehiring for a position if we're able to reallocate some of these duties. I will make sure to make that very clear, however, and I'll make sure to do the summary of any type of impacts or differences at the beginning so that we can kind of get that in our brains before we go into the details.
Actually, I guess not, this is minor feedback, but we always see this breakdown, you know, total cost, salary, benefits. Usually we just care about the total cost.
Yeah.
I think the salary and benefits could be in the fine print. I mean, just to make, I guess. Well, now I take it back, because I think when the general public looks at this, they wanna look at a salary number, so. Okay. I withdraw that, I realize why it's there.
You're like, oh, for us, it's different. And I would say like, I would invite any department head to either prepare something more filled out as far as the justification goes and present it to you to include in the packet, or just email the commission directly. Basically, what I'm getting at is our workshop starts at 2:00. We have a lot to cover, and we're not gonna have time for everyone to have 10 minutes to justify their new position. So the more and it's better to present to the commission sort of documentation that they can refer back to.
Right,
And so the more that we can promote that, the better.
great.
So it sounds like what you're saying is we don't want any department heads advocating for a position at the meeting, they need to do that ahead of time.
That's encouraged, though. I think that they should definitely be available for questions. And maybe we'll just, yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Ultimately, I don't think we're gonna give them the floor to give a speech on their new position.
Yeah,
But they
I mean, if it were up to me, I would say, yeah, that's not gonna happen unless someone has questions, you know, so that if they're gonna make their case, you know, in writing, it's gonna be emailed out ahead of time.
So if they don't feel like, I mean, I think it's great, this little flavor text here, but I think if they want to give more, then they should prepare that in advance.
Great.
Yeah.
If
I'll email all the department heads that submitted a proposal and ask that they do that. If,
on the requesting department heads too, can we get, hey, such and such county of like and kind pays this?
so we did go ahead and draft some compensation data. I didn't show that here just because, again, I wanted to make sure it was an overview, but we do have that for, and I'll make sure that we have it for every single position, but when we were assisting department heads in
Yeah.
rating a grade for a position, we did do that
Okay.
compensation data for comparable positions in the state.
One, I mean, if we need the position, we need the position, I mean, to get on it, but two, are we doing something that is both competitive to
Absolutely,
other counties doing the same?
absolutely. Thank you. All right, wonderful.
All right, I
You don't
think
need
we're good.
anything else for me?
For today. I think we're good.
Very good. Well, I've got some things to work on. Thank you all.
Thanks.
We'll see you
Alright,
soon.
Thank you. You go ahead and pull up the next topic. This, I'm trying to remember, I was working on one thing here when we all joined. I just want to make that note here. All right, I'm gonna adjust the agenda just for a moment. We were gonna talk about revenue projection and then the current state of the budget, but given that we just talked about the new salaries, I wanted to share two things. Current fund balances in I guess that's the best way to say it, just, I mean, current fund balances for a lot of our funds. And then the second part, that we'll come to that in a minute, is the current status of our proposed budget. So this chart just shows fund balances, and then I'll get do you have any context you want to share here? Then this is just the balances and, they almost look pretty even across the board, but it's just a representation of what available for fund balance. Let me show.
There are some pending adjustments as it relates to the state auditor's report. However, those have been noted in the 2023 financial statements. A reimbursement from the general fund to the Fund 16 TRT promotion actually has already been recorded in the books. And based on current discussions of that, of the sort of the findings and the conclusions to that, which were right there, we're right on the heels of. It's actually going to be reduced from what's been recorded on the books, so we're
The
actually
money's gonna go back the other direction.
correct. But however, there's going to be a reimbursement from the general fund 10 to Fund 22 TRCC. So that's a pretty lean balance. That's going to be 6,022, and that's going to get bumped up. And then the only other thing that kind of jumps out that I would make note of is that B roads went from 4.9 to 6.4, and there was a one-time legislative allocation. I think it was nearly $3 million to county roads. That was received early this year, and so that's why I saw that big spike there from 4.9 to 6.4.
And I was just gonna add on the stuff related to that, we've got a pretty precise idea of what that's gonna be now, because we had a meeting just before this meeting where I think basically they checked off, and so that is now resolved except for signing the letter. So
Yeah.
that, I could more about that. But I think that's all taken care of.
Protection stakes, yeah.
And I post this data right here in our folder, and I imagine when we go into the commission workshops, we'll just come back and refer to this. All right, let me kind of show you, scroll down here and show this is the current status of our proposed budget today for the general fund. Some of the assumptions. Gabe's going to talk about this in a minute, but we are assuming an $800,000 over budget or underspend trend. So in balancing our fund balance, you can tell me the general fund balance, we're actually assuming that we can go over budget by 800,000. Is that fair to say, or is there a better way to say that?
Yeah, so I'll
You're
elaborate.
gonna talk
I don't
about
have
that
a
in-
document to
okay.
present today, but I'll elaborate on
So,
that.
so eventually we'll see what the actual number has been the last few years.
Yeah.
Okay. Presently in our budget, proposed budget, I have assumed across the board, broad stroke, 1.3% revenue projection.
So
it's
that's
going
going
to be
combined property taxes, sales
Yeah,
tax, everything.
everything, all, property tax has its own revenue
So
projection
that's just a
from
sales,
Chris.
that's all sales taxes.
Yeah, all other taxes have a 1.3% revenue projection, and that's just to give us a baseline to this board will agree on what revenue projections by sales tax type. We're gonna start that conversation today, and in fact, the next agenda is to look at some historical trends and charts. And then decide how we want to come up with that revenue forecast. But right now, just for the baseline, we're 1.3%.
And Stephen, let's make sure as we go into the commission workshops and, you know, there's more eyes on this process that when we talk about revenues, we're really careful to specify if it's sales and use taxes, if it's property taxes. Let's make sure to spell out what we're talking about. Thanks.
Very good, and we'll see some charts even today. So the general fund is presently $726,000 over budget. Meaning, all the department heads came in and presented their budgets for, based on what they believe it's gonna take to operate their budget in the next year. We are 726,000 over budget. Plus. A salary, the 288,000 for the COLA. And that's that's what's just related to the general fund. Plus a requested, Jameson, Sheriff Jameson has requested an 82,876. Public safety tier 2 US contribution for the public safety group. That's on our list. plus 908,000 for new positions, and what's actually missing here, because it is the cost differential for the reclass. And I saw that there, but I didn't get that data in time to put that in here, so that could be another $60,000 to $100,000 on the reclass. So, but at a broad stroke level, if we were to approve the COLA, the public safety tier 2 URS contribution, and the 10 new positions, plus a little bit for reclasses, we're $2 million over budget. So that's just setting the bar for what work we need to do going into the commission workshops, that to balance the budget in the general fund, we would need to shave $2 million.
And that,
1.3.
What's that?
1.3.
right, we want to bring it from 200 down to 800.
Yeah,
The eight,
no, the 800 is already included in
eight
it.
is
It's
factored
already
in.
assumed.
Oh, I thought. you
Yeah.
said
Oh, it
that.
is.
No, yeah,
Yeah,
800
we should make that clear.
is in, so
Yeah,
they,
sorry,
we
the
would be
way-
2.8
the way it
if we
was
didn't.
laid out, I thought you said we were
Oh,
at 700, but
that's-
plus all this, we're now at this.
Yeah, yeah, and even just to. Even just to show, I mean, show the math here that we're doing, let me show up our. Alright, this is the budget worksheet I'm working on. And let me just go to the bottom of, and we're just balancing Fund 10. This is what everybody's working on, the master budget. So. This is the 720, I think it looks like it changed a little bit, 725,000 over budget, but already includes the 800 contribution that's in as a revenue, I think, right?
Yep.
But. So what's not included in there then is, that's what's in our budget, then these three things. Plus the reclass cost, puts us at a $2 million target to go and cut the budget.
So just a small question, for the new positions, is that assuming zero COLA or full
Oh.
COLA?
Great question. I would imagine that's, I'll bet it's in her little worksheet, but it's a good question. But I think it assumes the COLA as well for future 2025.
I think that's what they were putting to the side, is saying that this position does include the COLA, projected COLA.
Starting in January.
I think so, because that's what they did with the position request that I had, they included. the
Okay.
COLA.
So now let me ask the question of the board here. We have $2 million potential gap. What are the ways we fill that? That we cut it all out or take money from, transfer money from the general fund to cover the requested approved costs, even if it's over budgeted?
Well, I mean. You go through and you cut the fat, right?
Yeah.
So you cut the fat, you go through the commission's gonna go through positions. Say yea or nay on the positions. We're all gonna go through our budgets, I would assume, and see what we can cut here and there, just out of the,
Yeah.
may not need this year, we can wait next year or whatever. But, and then at that point, then. I mean, there's the one-time purchases versus the. Ongoing. But your new positions and your COLA is gonna be ongoing, the retirement one. But what out of that 700
Yeah.
whatever, $26,000 is a one-time purchase. That department actually needs, and can you draw that money from somewhere else that's not in the general fund, that's like the savings to make that one-time purchase. In order to clear some of that 726 up, so it doesn't impact the general fund, where you have more room for some of these other stuff. That would be my questions or suggestions.
yeah, that last point is good. I think that I hadn't really thought of that. Perhaps a budgeted contribution from the fund balance that would be greater than 800. Reflecting expenses paid out of savings for one-time type purchases. Yeah, and I think that we're going to be, by the commission workshop, we'll have included any voluntary cuts that department heads offer. And then at that point, I think myself, Stephen, Quinn, we're gonna use our discretion to identify new expenditures or even other miscellaneous, expenditures that we deem worthy of further review. And then perhaps we include a survey type analysis for the commission to take a temperature. Yeah, Tim?
Yeah, I was gonna make a similar point. I think in the past, you and staff have, basically come up with a prioritized list of you know, that, to cut, the places where we think department budgets could be cut. And the commission can decide how far down that list it wants to go. We'll be making similar decisions with the new positions. Is this, I guess, sometimes I think when we discuss like one-time purchases or capital purchases, we're not always distinguishing. Is like how much is any of this something that would be classified as a capital purchase, or is that budgeted?
Well, that's a good question, because even just some examples of this over budget here is the Spanish Trail Arena that needs a lot of equipment. So that kind of fits in the category of discretionary or possibly funded some other way.
Over $5,000
Yeah.
amount. I know we were supposed to follow up on that, what we classified as capital or not.
Yeah.
But like I said, like certain items, like if it's a purchase of $5,000 or more, that one item technically should follow the capital equipment or
Yeah.
capital project.
And then the Spanish Trail Arena has several of those lawnmowers and then roofs and doors.
Okay, but these numbers do.
Oh,
include this.
yes,
But I'm just wondering if they. Like, I think when we're doing budget, if we think of the cost of like a new county office building as somehow being separate from all this stuff. And so that's one end of the spectrum, it's $12 million or whatever. But there might be smaller items which could, again, be thought, it's just sort of the one time versus ongoing issue, and we do have a lot of funding reserves, we've got to spend them sometime. So I'm just wondering how we can distinguish between these sort of routine expenses and maybe
Yeah.
replacing an HVAC as something we know
Yeah.
we've got to do every
Yep.
20 years or something.
and I think where you're going here is the next step. And this here is the broad stroke status of where we're on the budget. So now Gabe and actually I have communicated with the department heads in email that we are over budget and everyone needs to be thinking about voluntary cuts, and they're coming to me to talk about those already. So the next step is to actually look at those voluntary cuts, us to look at, we'll call them candidates for cuts or reductions or the special treatment, like the capital expense items. And then we're gonna bring that forward into a commission workshop. This is just kind of like the first broad view of what our condition is.
Yes, actually, maybe another way of saying what I was trying to express. One could imagine breaking the budget into two pieces, one is sort of a routine thing, so we might want to get that one close to balancing. Along the lines you've expressed, but there might be some unusual. But like I think a good example is digitizing the
Right.
records at the recorder.
One time thing.
Yeah, that's not something we have to do again, and so I would tend to put that in a separate bucket. And those are gonna add up too, and we don't, wanna spend all our money that might go for flood control and office buildings instead on. These kind of smaller capital purchases, but it's, I think it's worth thinking about those truly one-time expenses differently.
Okay, that's a great idea.
The one-time expenses carry a different weight too. If you can pay for something once and get it done, that carries a greater importance, than an ongoing payment forever.
Yeah, that's the idea.
And one thing I want, before I forget to mention it, because I've already in this meeting forgotten. But especially since we have Treasurer Kaufman here on the line, one thing that sort of I've asked to be considered in the conversation about new positions and reclassifications is it has been custom for the treasurer to present an elected official compensation survey every 3 years. And so he has prepared an analysis, and I do want to invite him to present that analysis before the commission next Wednesday. And that basically what that means is elected officials don't qualify for milestone increases as do all of the rest of county staff. So that's a little bump. That's a bump every 3 years, basically 2 years. And so not to pile on, but there's another potential 12 to 142,000 that could be associated with that based on the scale at which the commission might be willing to consider such an action. So let's just make sure to include that.
So is that? I'm sure for some elected official positions, that's pretty straightforward, just with it, comparable local governments are paying.
Yeah.
But I think in other cases that there's been like vigorous debate about what the correct methodology is, for example, county attorney, maybe we want to compare ourselves only to certain counties and not these other counties. I mean, that was a big debate a few years ago. I think comparing commissioner salaries is tricky because, some people have only 3, we've got 7. Some of them are considered full-time, some are considered part-time. And so it's not at all straightforward so I just want to make sure that if Chris is coming up with this report and there are parts of it, and I'm thinking especially commissioners, county attorney, that where the comparisons aren't so straightforward, that we have time to adjust it before it pops up in a meeting and we just have to give this up and down.
Yeah, I agree. Chris, do you think you would be willing to share that analysis with the commission directly here before next week's meeting?
Yeah, anytime.
Yeah, I just think that the sooner the better.
Yeah, I think Chris also, he includes some analysis about the differential between the elected official and their chief deputy as part of one of the paths that could be chosen for that analysis. Because I think that was used to give Deputy Palmer.
Well, that's for the sheriff's adjustment. Yeah.
Right. Oh, yeah, it was for the sheriff.
The difference between chair or an elected chair and the difference between a non-elected,
Right,
their
yeah.
first, their next spot.
Right, and the
Clerk's here, chief deputy makes more than the
Yeah.
highest ranking, so.
Right, and I plan on approaching the commission as well for my own position, which is also has its own sort of pitfalls in analyzing, because there are some counties that are much smaller and less complicated than Grand County that pay for a clerk and an auditor, which is far more, so, and it's just really interesting, that analysis.
I do want to throw out the elected official versus the chief deputy. Chief deputy can be fired and the elected official cannot. And so, to me, it's not an automatic red flag if the deputies are making more than the elected official.
Okay, any other comments on on this? Otherwise, we're gonna add detail and bring this up into next workshops. Okay,
I'd make one more comment, just about the broad strokes on the budget.
go ahead.
Just a reminder that we've talked about cutting and using fund balances to balance it. There's obviously a third option, which is increasing revenue. And I would just mention that, at this date, the commission doesn't really have the option to raise property taxes for next year, because we're pretty much too late to do that. So if that is ever identified as something that is something that the commission wants to look at, it's something that's going to have to be discussed and advertised and acted on much earlier in the year.
Thanks for bringing that up. And maybe how I would respond to that is, since we have a finance director that's going to be doing more monitoring and working and being hands-on with the budget throughout the year. Stephen, if you wouldn't mind setting in your calendar, some sort of reminder for August or September of next year, as you're kind of getting a good feel for the outlook of how the budget is rounding out, whether that's something that needs to be brought up for discussion at the commission so that we can make all the preparations necessary. I will say for the record that, I would be very hesitant and to consider that path, but it's got to be, it's a tool in the box.
Well, but my understanding of what, we're not going to consider it for this budget because it's too late.
Right.
But in the future, and.
We've never-
The way I'm imagining the sequence, right now, we have the luxury, not luxury, we have the advantage of having pretty big fund reserves. So we can, if we wanted to go $2 million over budget, we could do it, and we would still have pretty big healthy reserves. And so I imagine what might happen sometime in the future is, we tighten our belts all we can and still, we run a deficit and our fund reserves go down. And that, I think, would trigger the conversation, well, is it time to increase revenue somehow, for the next budget year? And so right, I mean,
I see what you mean.
broad strokes, our reserve funds have been going up, which means, we're not spending recklessly if our bank account balances are growing. But if they level off or start to shrink, that's when we should begin the conversation, and we can afford to take a year or two to figure that out.
Yeah, good point.
Okay, I'll also say for the record, I don't think property tax increases anywhere on the horizon at the moment, because I think we can have healthy revenue from other sources, and we've got enough money in the banks.
Yeah. But to your point, around September, before September, I'll present to the commission our the then current budget performance and fund balances, just to have a review or look
Yeah,
at it.
is it time for a property? And I think it'll be a short conversation next year, Brian, the answer will be no.
Yeah.
But if we just get in the habit of doing that each year, at some point, the answer might be yes.
Okay, well, let's go to the next topic, and it's not an answer we want to come up with today, and this is the revenue forecast for next year. Now I have created some charts, and I've submitted those to you all to look at, and I'm not presenting them or publishing them yet, because we are still in the process of working on these, and I think this is a journey rather than a destination at this point, about looking at historical trends and deciding what rate or rates to use next year for taxes, not property tax. Chris Kaufman has already included property tax estimates in our budget, but for all the other tax types, we will come up with a forecasted rate. So this little packet, which the Budget Advisory Board, and only the Budget Advisory Board has right now, we could share it with commissioners or other, but this has all tax revenue in a 12-month moving total in 2 time horizons, a 7-year time horizon and a 3-year time horizon. And it shows 2 data points, revenue in blue, revenue by month over 3 years, and then the percentage
Is it revenue?
change.
It's not, is it revenue by month, or is it a cumulative 12 months?
It's a cumulative rolling 12-month, and that, yeah, so it's a 12-month,
So in particular,
moving.
we're not gonna see summer versus when,
right, this is.
cycles in this, because
yeah.
it's always a
Yeah.
full year that we.
And actually I updated the chart title, I think I had 12-month moving average before, but it's a 12-month total, rolling
Right.
as we go here.
Mhm.
And then so blue is the total 12 months rolling. The orange is the percent change. So looking at this chart right here.
That is percent change from moving the window
Yeah,
1 month back, or moving it 12 months?
it is
back?
actually the change from like May 24 to June 24. That's the percent change. We had a 2% change month over month between those 2 bars. That's what that orange chart means.
Year over year.
Oh, yeah, or bar over bar, which is really,
Well, okay, but one might imagine, I mean, if what we're ultimately trying to predict is like a. Like, if it turned out that, this is very smooth data, and each blue bar was, say, 1% higher than the bar before it. That doesn't mean 1% annual growth, that means more like 12% annual growth. Right,
because it is a 12-month moving.
right, but we're just
Yeah.
looking at the increase from. A month ago, so you might also imagine plotting, compare, we've got, here's a 12-month window, compare it to the immediately preceding. Going 13 to 24 months back, and then that would be kind of those percentages. Would be like an annual number, which is,
Yeah, and to say it just a different way. the June 24 number here at, 17,240. That's the prior 12 months of revenue. And then we went to, this number. Anyway, the bigger number here, that's again, 12 months aggregate in the month of July. But I think what's important, and we don't want to drill into too much detail here, because I want to keep us at a broad level. Right now, I told you I'm using a 1.3% across the board revenue forecast rate of growth. Because year over year, just from 2023 to 2024 is 1.3. That's just numbers, aggregating January through October of 2023 to aggregate June or January through October 2024 is 1.3%. All right, so that's why I plugged that number in as just an aggregate revenue forecast. But we want to be more specific, but we don't want to engineer this as well. So let's just say 1.3 was our baseline. And I say, all right, well, let's look at historical trends. If you look at a 7-year historical trend, revenue is increasing from, about 8.5 million to 18 million. There's a significant revenue increase over 7 years. However, the month to month change has been pretty flat. That we haven't seen, we have had some big spikes here, COVID, post-COVID, of course. But if you look at the trend line, across the 7 years, it's pretty flat. Looking at just a 3-year horizon, overall, we've got a negative trend. And so looking at this chart alone, this trend line for change and the trend line for revenue is a little less than 0. So a person could argue to say, Stephen, your 1.3 year over year may be a little bit optimistic compared to a 3-year trend. So my point is, we're not going to look at very specific numbers or conclusions from this chart. It's more of, what does the data show me in trying to estimate next year? Is 1.3 optimistic, or maybe I should go with the 0 based on what I see here? Or anyway, can anyone else? I'm open for suggestions here on looking at this data.
So one idea, I think we discussed it earlier, is to look at the taxes individually, because in particularly, the tourism taxes behave differently from the general sales, more broadly based sales taxes. And so I think estimating each tax revenue stream individually makes sense.
And thank you for saying that, Kevin. So just to,
and then also, I know you can scroll down and show some of those.
okay.
I think, you see a lot on the bottom graph. We had some pretty unusual stuff happen, at least 2020 through 2022. A big dip followed by a big increase, and now we're sort of settling down after the increase. And so if we're trying to take some longer term average, I would be careful about, I'd like to do just the last couple of years rather than getting back into the post-COVID bubble, because that'll, I think that makes more sense.
And that's one thing I would like to come out of today's meeting is maybe our time threshold, because I agree with you. I'd like to look back, even 3 years on the top chart. That's probably as far back as I would like to go, because we do see some things. But before I go there, let me just show you in this packet for you all. This is all tax revenue. But then we do have a similar set of charts for just TRT. You can see how the behavior is the same, 7 years is an increase, 3 years is a decrease. In fact, the decrease for TRT is greater at an individual tax level than the overall. Let me just scroll through these and you guys can look at them at your leisure. Restaurant increases 7 years. Is it increasing over 3 years? That's the data. I did lump sales tax and county tax, and Kevin even questioned my methodology here, but both of those tax revenues go to the same general fund account. So I was really looking for a target account. I could split these up just to see them individually, but they're going into the same fund. So I kind of grouped them, but I can change our method. But similar thing here though, increase. rapid increase over 7 years or 3 years. Next up is the hospital revenue. And again, it has its own revenue account increase across the board here for both horizons. And then I lumped all of these taxes, the county highway, public transit, off-road vehicles, tourism, because they all go to the same revenue account. Again, here a little downward trend over 3 years, but an upward trend over 7. So I suggest the Budget Advisory Board just review these charts, look at their own data. And even just look at your own crystal ball. And the next Budget Advisory Board meeting, I suggest we come up with rates for each one of these groups, because again, that the target is a revenue account.
You mean budget workshop, like commission?
Budget workshop.
Yep.
Yeah, budget workshop. And then when we come up with those numbers, I'll go back into that budget, our budget proposal and update those revenue targets, and then we'll, see the new balancing amount that we need to work to.
And I would suggest as much as possible refining a couple approaches. And then sort of creating a package or 2 or 3 at most for the commission to sort of do a straw poll and basically agree on.
Oh, a couple.
Rather than getting too granular in the meeting, I think that would, I think as long as you have some approaches that you're willing to justify and explain in 5 minutes, I think that's probably sufficient.
So what I'm here is present options, not just a number or a set of numbers, but maybe some optionals of optimistic, pessimistic or something.
I think, I think that's, rather than, 18 versus 20, I don't think that's not, you should just say which one you think is best. But I do think I think often in the past, we look at what the spreadsheets tell us, and then maybe just to be conservative, we budget, if the spreadsheets are telling us a 3% increase, we might budget for 2 or 1 or something like that. And so I think presenting that kind of option makes sense. And a point, another one of my budget hobby horses is, I think if we didn't have fund balances and, our bank accounts were getting close to 0, and then we'd want to be very careful not to be too optimistic on these revenue projections. But the fact that we do have a lot of money in the bank means that we don't have to be overly pessimistic. We can try to just make an accurate guess as if we were trying to win a contest or something. Because if it turns out that it's too optimistic, we can afford that because of the fund balances.
Right, yeah, because budgeting that's too pessimistic, that can be injurious to the health of an organization, and it doesn't constitute good budgeting in my mind. So yeah, there is a balance there.
Yeah, and I think, if you go back enough years, the county didn't have as big fund, so I think there's sort of a cultural memory or inertia here to be conservative, to try to be a little bit pessimistic in these revenue projections. But again, after many years in a row of being pessimistic, we've got a lot in fund balance, and we can try to bring it to the realistic as opposed to pessimistic.
Okay. Well, that's our assignment. I'll work with Gabe to try to package this data up, so the next Budget Advisory Board meeting, we can draw some conclusions and present some range options. Okay. The next agenda item, Gabe, I think is just the final one of
Okay. So I didn't end up having time to update this document, but I just thought I would just say real briefly what this means, this justifying a budgeted draw from the fund balance. So as Stephen presented before, we have this custom where we budget $800,000 in the red, and one, a typical person not familiar with budgeting in general might think, well, I don't know who does that with their own personal budget unless they want to be in a whole lot of debt, or that doesn't make sense. You want to present a balanced budget. But the point is budgeting 800 to pull 800 in savings to balance the budget is a balanced budget because of our very consistent historical trends of underspending our final approved budget by the end of the following year, for which that budget is approved. And so that can actually be done on with compensation, salary and benefits alone across departments. And so what I'll do is I have an analysis of up through 2022. Or I should, through 2023. And then into a little bit of a projection for 2024. Actuals versus budgeted, and it'll show that we're always left with this cushion. And then, so that gives us all the confidence to take that action, which might otherwise seem off. So that's all. I'll have that ready for the 11/6 meeting, and we'll spend a minute on it just to give everyone that confidence.
Well, and even to say it in terms, I'm a project manager by trade. And I would call that, in project management budgeting, the cost performance indicator, meaning you budget for $100, but over the life of the project, you're only spending $80. Well, it just shows you're an 80%, cost performance indicator. And I think that's what you've been saying here. So you're only hitting about X%, and the total is less than 100. So we're just gonna kind of make that assumption for.
And am I correct, Dave, that a big part of that is we approve positions, but actually hiring someone to fill that position can take quite a while, sometimes more than a year. I know certainly in the past, there's been a lot of unfilled positions in the sheriff's department.
Right, and it's not only just unfilled ones that were recently approved, but just positions that become vacant due to retirement, resignation, or otherwise.
Or you can hire them at a lower rate than what you budgeted for.
Right.
You start brand new and budget for the higher grade steps, so you're gonna save money on that end too.
Right, like I can already tell you that the fact that the county hasn't had its commission administrator in place for so much of the year, I mean, that alone is gonna create a massive cushion in how this budget year looks.
But I will be interested to see, the trend of this, difference between budgeted spending and actual spending for each year, because I think over the last few years, we've 4 or 5 years ago, we realized that county salaries are too low and we couldn't hire. And so we had a lot of unfilled positions. And then gradually we brought salaries up, and now we're doing a better job of hiring. And so one could imagine that gap is, even if 800,000 made sense 4 or 5 years ago, maybe now it's something different. So I'll be interested to see.
Yep. Yeah, I tend to think that 800 might be considered conservative based on the historical trends.
So it might be larger than 800?
Yeah.
Okay. Good to know.
Okay.
Let's see, that was our last presentation and discussion item.
What about the action that tentative?
Yeah, so moving on to the next section of the agenda is action items. We don't have the 20 minutes for the 23rd ready yet. And so minutes for that meeting and for today's meeting might not get improved until 2025. We'll see. But we'll move on to action item number 7, and that's approval of recommendation to forward a tentative 2025 budget for consideration by the Grand County Commission. And so I'll go ahead and rattle off the suggested motion and would open the floor for anyone to entertain it. So I would entertain a motion to forward the Grand County 2025 tentative budget as presented throughout the Budget Advisory Board meetings for consideration by the Grand County Commission, whereby they are recommended to approve the necessary adjustments to that tentative budget such that the budgeted contribution from the general fund balance in order to balance the general fund is $800,000.
So moved.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Walker, second by Hackwell.
And I just, for anyone watching this, so we know that the budget isn't perfect right now, but there's a statutory requirement that we forward this recommendation by the state. So that's why we're taking this official action, even though we're continuing to refine and improve the budget. And the sentence at the end of Gabe's motion is just sort of telling the commission that, don't rubber stamp this, you need to work on it before it becomes a final budget.
Right. And I actually have to statutorily, I have to file it with the legislative body by the first day of the second to last month of the year. So by this Friday, the 1st, the commission will have to sort of have this in their file. Great, well, that was a motion by Walker, a second by Hackwell. All those in favor of the motion, raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
That motion passes 5-0. With Winfield and Throgmorton absent. And that concludes our agenda for today. It's only 11:06 PM or AM, sorry. And I will adjourn this meeting. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.